The creation, evolution, and legacy of Betty Boop. With her red lips, disproportionately large head, and unique voice, Betty Boop has become one of the most recognizable animated characters in the world, even though most people have never even seen the cartoons that made her famous to begin with. In today's video, we'll be looking at the creation and evolution of the Betty Boop character and examine why she's still just as, if not more, popular today as she was when she was first introduced nearly 100 years ago. Let's get into it. Betty Boop made her first animated appearance in the cartoon Dizzy Dishes, which was released on August 9, 1930 by Fleischer Studios. Animated by Grim Natwick, who would eventually work on Disney's Snow White, Betty was originally introduced as the love interest of one of the studio's other popular characters, Bimbo, who was an anthropomorphic black and white dog. Like Bimbo, Betty was similarly canine-inspired, complete with floppy ears, large cheeks, and a black nose. Although she sported this dog design in several of her early films, Betty would eventually become human, wearing hoop earrings and having a more curvaceous figure. And her dog form made its final appearance at the end of 1931 in Jack and the Beanstalk. With her short skirts, bobbed hair, and penchant for partying, Betty was a clear ode to the flappers of the 1920s, who flouted social norms and challenged traditional gender roles of the time period. Although this trend had already died down by the time she was created, audiences saw Betty as a fond reminder of this bygone era, a time before the Great Depression when you could still be carefree and have fun. This, combined with her theatricality and sexual allure, made Betty a hit with older audiences, and before long she had become Fleischer Studios' most profitable and popular character. By 1932, Betty Boop had begun starring in her own cartoon series, but that wasn't the reason her name was in all of the newspapers that year. Following the character's transition to humanoid, singer and actress Helen Kane filed a $250,000 lawsuit against Max Fleischer, claiming that Betty Boop infringed upon her likeness and had become unfair competition. Stating in an interview, quote, "While imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, this type of imitation is the opposite. When some children ran to open the door of my car, they hailed me as Betty Boop, so you can see how this leaves me on the short end of Helen Kane." They eventually went to trial in 1934, with Kane attempting to argue that she was the originator of the boop boop ba-doop line and that Betty's singing style was a direct caricature of her own. Kane had first risen to fame in the late 1920s following the success of her performances of That's My Weakness Now and I Wanna Be Loved by You in 1928. This popularity led to her being signed by Paramount Pictures in 1929, and she was eventually cast in several musicals, including Dangerous Nan McGrew in 1930, which Fleischer Studios took inspiration from for 1931's Bum Bandit. Once called, quote, the most menacing of the baby talk ladies by the New York Times in 1929, Helen Kane's supposedly unique form of comedic posture was used by many vaudevillian performers of the time period, including Irene Franklin, the Duncan sisters, and Fanny Brice, who had an entire radio show based around her childish persona named Baby Snooks. During the height of her popularity, Kane was referred to as the boop boop ba-doop girl, but this type of vocal improvisation, known as scat singing, had already been growing increasingly popular during the 1920s, especially with African American performers in the jazz scene. Lew Walton testified for the defense, saying that in 1923 he had begun managing child singer and entertainer Esther Jones, who went by Baby Esther or Little Esther, and she similarly used hot licks, vocal improv, in her songs, which included Boop Boop Boo and What Dat Da. Walton went on to testify that Helen Kane had been present at one of Esther's shows in New York City in April 1928, weeks before she would begin incorporating boops into her own act. At the time of the trial, Esther Jones was performing in Paris, but a now-lost video of her performing was submitted as evidence that Helen Kane was not the only singer to incorporate scat singing into her act, raising the question as to whether or not Kane could claim the style as uniquely her own. As for the similarity between Betty Boop's appearance and Helen Kane's, the defense brought forth a picture of popular actress Clara Bow, who had a similar vampy jazz baby look. The judge went on to rule in favor of the defense, with Helen Kane saying of the verdict in one interview, quote, "I'm deeply shocked. I consider it very unfair, as all of my friends believe the cartoon's a deliberate caricature of me." Fleischer Studios would go on to openly taunt Helen Kane, releasing a victory song of the voice actresses begging that no one take their boop away, and they even took Betty to court in her own cartoons. As a caricature of the 1920s flapper, Betty was heavily sexualized from the very beginning. Besides being placed in rather suspicious situations, many of her songs had incredibly risque innuendos, with the character often singing and dancing in a suggestive manner in order to woo male characters. This all changed in 1934, when the Motion Picture Production Code, also known as the Hays Code, was established. The intention of the Hays Code was to promote traditional values, and things like sex, nudity, drug use, and profanity were forbidden from being depicted on screen. Although she was a cartoon, Betty Boop was by no means exempt from these restrictive guidelines. Her mini dress and garters were replaced with more conservative clothing, and she was no longer a flapper, but instead a housewife or career woman. As time passed, other changes were made, with her hair getting straighter, her jewelry being removed, and a shift to a more mature personality. This drastic change in the character alienated her previously more adult audience, and contributed to the decline of the series, and Betty Boop was eventually discontinued in 1939. In the 1950s, there was a Betty Boop revival, largely thanks to the advent of television, and as a result, many modern-day Betty Boop merchandise placed the character in that time period. In 1984, she was revived once again via the comic strip Betty Boop and Felix, which ran for 4 years. And the character would later make a cameo appearance in the 1988 film Who Framed Roger Rabbit. By this point, it was clear that she wasn't going anywhere, and merchandise featuring the character quickly oversaturated the market, with Betty being put on everything from clothing to cups to cars. A large part of what makes Betty Boop popular to this day is what made her a success to begin with, and that's how transgressive she is. When she was first introduced, animated female cartoon characters were either clones of their male co-stars or nothing more than nagging housewives, but Betty went out dancing, flirted, and was more than willing to get in a fight. Now, there's no denying that many of the male characters act outright predatory towards Betty, and that she's extremely hypersexualized. But this reflected the very real issue of sexual harassment that women then, and now, face. While it's easy to relegate her to nothing more than a sex symbol, she was also progressive, flying planes, slapping creepy bosses, and even becoming president. Although Betty Boop has been around for nearly a century at this point, conversations about the character have shifted in recent years, and her origins and inspirations have been hotly debated. As previously mentioned, Esther Jones, Baby Esther, was provided as an example of scat singing in order to discredit Helen Kane's claims that she created the Boop Boop Badoop line. In February 2021, Esther's name once again became a topic of conversation, with multiple stories going viral that stated that she was the real-life inspiration for Betty Boop, and as such, Betty Boop was actually black. The majority of these stories cited an article that was published by PBS in 2015 entitled 10 Little Known Black History Facts, which has since been retracted. In the article, they referenced Helen Kane's trial and how Jones was the originator of the boops. However, it also included several fallacies, like Jones being a regular at Harlem's Cotton Club, when she actually performed at the Everglades Restaurant Club. This confusion was likely due to her sharing the same name as the R&B singer Esther Mae Jones, who went by Little Esther, and was born a full decade after Baby Esther had started performing. In June 2021, Mark Fleischer, the grandson of the man who created Betty Boop, released a statement about the matter. Quote, "I've been aware for some time of inaccurate theories circulating on social media and elsewhere concerning Betty's origins. The concept that Betty Boop grew out of and reflected the jazz age culture of her time is absolutely true. Yet, as history shows, she was not modeled after any single performer. It's important to distinguish the collective creativity of the jazz age and its style from the many individual jazz age artists who contributed to it. And the number of amazing artists and performers who created that great era and who are embodied in Betty Boop is so large that it's impossible to single out any one great talent as her inspiration. Esther Jones was a truly talented young performer. What is so problematic here is that to mistakenly single her out, or anyone else, as the sole source of Betty Boop's jazz age inspiration creates an untrue narrative that distracts from, and potentially eclipses, our appreciation and enjoyment of the very real contributions that those involved have made to our culture. We've mentioned it on this channel before, but fact-checking is incredibly important, especially in this current day and age where anyone can tout something as the truth. And I couldn't tell you how many TikTok videos I've seen about this subject who don't even bother to use photos of the right person. Black women's contributions to society, especially the arts, are often brushed under the rug or outright stolen, and this situation is no different. The misinformation about Esther Jones's role in the creation of Betty Boop is a disservice to her own legacy. She was a wildly talented child performer who traveled the world, but because of a few fake articles and TikTok videos, the general populace thinks she's someone else entirely. Instead of trying to force her into becoming the real Betty Boop, it would be amazing if we could focus on the person herself, and maybe then we'd be able to learn more about the life of Esther Jones. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Bye!